In a quiet suburban home on Christmas Eve, 67-year-old retired teacher Adeline Turner prepared for what she hoped would be a peaceful family dinner. Years of walking on eggshells around her manipulative daughter-in-law finally reached a breaking point when psychological warfare erupted into physical confrontation. One slap, after enduring relentless emotional abuse, would either destroy her family forever or finally set her free. What began as desperate peacekeeping became a battle for dignity, witnessed by a Marine veteran neighbor who understood that some civilian conflicts require military precision to resolve. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Adeline Turner's hands trembled as she adjusted the holly centerpiece for the third time in 10 minutes. The red berries caught the afternoon light streaming through her kitchen window, perfect and unblemished, unlike the knot of anxiety that had taken residence in her chest since Thanksgiving. She stepped back, studying the dining room table with the critical eye of someone who'd learned that perfection was the only armor against criticism. The china belonged to her mother-in-law, passed down through 3 generations of Turner women. Harold used to joke that the plates were older than their marriage, his gentle laughter filling corners of the house that now sat silent. 5 years since his heart attack, and she still caught herself setting an extra place. Still expected to hear his key in the lock at 6:30. "Stop it," she whispered to herself, smoothing down her navy dress. Conservative enough to avoid comment, festive enough to show she'd made an effort. Sarah would find fault regardless. She always did. The turkey rested in the oven, golden and glistening, timer set for another hour. Mashed potatoes waited in the slow cooker, green beans prepped and ready for the steamer. She'd made Sarah's requested sweet potato casserole, despite knowing it would sit barely touched. Too sweet for David, too unfamiliar for the children. But refusing would mean another lecture about being set in her ways and resistant to new ideas. Through the window above her sink, she caught sight of Captain Jake Morrison methodically splitting wood in his backyard. His movements were precise, economical, the axe rising and falling with military rhythm. He'd been out there for an hour, working through what looked like enough firewood to last until spring. She'd lived next door to him for 3 years now, ever since he'd bought the Hendersons' place, and their conversations rarely extended beyond polite nods and weather observations. But she'd noticed things. The way he shoveled her walk after heavy snows without being asked. How her garbage cans always seemed to find their way back to her garage after collection day. The porch light that mysteriously got replaced when it burned out, though she'd never seen him do it. Harold would have liked him, she thought. Would have appreciated a neighbor who understood duty without needing recognition. Jake paused in his work, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the December chill. For a moment, his gaze swept across the neighboring yards with the systematic attention of someone trained to notice details. When his eyes found her window, she pretended to busy herself with the dish towel, but not before catching something in his expression. Concern, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit who also carried invisible wounds. A car door slammed in her driveway, and her heart performed its familiar dance of hope and apprehension. David's voice carried through the cold air, cheerful and deliberately loud, the tone he used when he was nervous. "Hey, Mom, where do you want me to put the wine?" She opened the front door to find her son balancing 2 bottles of Pinot Noir and a bag of dinner rolls, his architect's hands steady despite the juggling act. At 42, David still had Harold's gentle brown eyes and quick smile, though worry lines had carved themselves deeper around his mouth in recent years. "Just set them on the counter, sweetheart." She reached for the rolls, noting how he avoided her eyes. "How was the drive?" "Not bad." Left early to beat the traffic. He followed her into the kitchen, his gaze sweeping over her preparations with the same critical assessment she'd performed moments before. "Everything looks perfect, Mom, really." The word hung between them, weighted with years of subtext. Perfect meant safe. Perfect meant no ammunition for Sarah's sharp tongue. Perfect meant another Christmas, where they could all pretend their family wasn't slowly fracturing along invisible fault lines. "Where are Sarah and the kids?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from his fidgeting. "They'll be here soon." Sarah had some last-minute shopping to finish. He moved to the window, ostensibly checking the turkey, but she caught him glancing toward Jake Morrison's yard. New neighbor's really into that wood splitting, isn't he? Captain Morrison? Yes, he stays quite busy. She set the rolls in a basket, adding the cloth napkin Sarah had deemed more elegant than paper. He's very quiet. Keeps to himself mostly. David nodded, but his attention had already shifted to his phone, thumbs moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. Texting Sarah, no doubt, providing intelligence about the domestic situation. The oven timer chimed, and Adeline reached for her potholders, grateful for the distraction. The turkey emerged perfect, bronzed skin crispy, legs wiggling when tested, the meat thermometer reading exactly 165 degrees. Harold had always carved, making a ceremony of it with his grandfather's carving set, and practiced flourishes that made the children laugh. Now David would handle the honors, his precise architect's hands working with less showmanship but equal care. Another car in the driveway, this one announcing itself with the sharp beep of a luxury sedan's alarm system. Adeline's stomach clenched as she heard Sarah's voice carrying across the yard, cultured, confident, with the slight edge that meant she'd found something worth commenting on during the drive. David, did you remember to bring the good wine? I specifically said not to trust your mother's liquor selection. Emma's voice piped up, bright and diplomatic at 12 years old. Grandma always has everything we need, Mom. That's not the point, Emma. It's about appropriate presentation. Adeline closed her eyes for a moment, drawing on reserves of patience she'd been cultivating for 15 years. Through the window, she noticed Jake Morrison had stopped his wood splitting. He stood perfectly still, axe resting against his shoulder, his attention fixed on something beyond her line of sight. Something in his posture reminded her of a guard dog that had caught an unfamiliar scent. The front door opened, and 8-year-old Lucas burst through first, all energy and Christmas excitement. Grandma! Grandma! We brought you presents, and Mom made me wear my good shirt, but it itches, and can I have cookies? She knelt to his level, breathing in his little boy's scent of shampoo and winter air. Of course you can have cookies, but after dinner. Did you grow taller since Thanksgiving? I think so. Dad measured me on the door thing, and I'm almost as tall as Emma was when she was my age. Emma appeared next, more reserved but with Harold's eyes shining above a shy smile. She'd hit that awkward stage where childhood and adolescence warred for territory, her 12-year-old wisdom sometimes startling in its clarity. Hi, Grandma. The house smells amazing. Thank you, sweetheart. How was your recital last week? I wanted to come, but it was fine. Emma's gaze flicked toward the doorway where her mother's heels clicked against the hardwood. Maybe next time. They both knew there wouldn't be a next time. Not if Sarah had anything to say about it. The recitals, school plays, and soccer games had gradually become family-only events, with family defined by increasingly narrow parameters. Sarah entered like a perfectly dressed storm front, her blonde hair styled in waves that had cost more than Adeline's monthly grocery budget. Her smile was gallery perfect, the kind that looked genuine in photographs but never quite reached her blue eyes. Adeline, hello. The drive was absolutely brutal. Apparently no one in this town understands proper merge etiquette. She moved through the living room with the assessing gaze of someone mentally cataloging flaws. Oh, you've rearranged things. How? Rustic. The comment landed with surgical precision. Rustic meant outdated. Rustic meant embarrassing. Rustic meant not quite good enough for the standards Sarah had brought from her family's Beacon Hill mansion. I moved Harold's chair closer to the window, Adeline said quietly. The light is better there for reading. Of course. Sarah's smile sharpened slightly. Though I do worry about you clinging to the past. David says you still set a place for him sometimes. David's face went pale. Sarah, I never said... It's perfectly natural, of course. Grief affects people differently. Sarah's tone carried the practiced sympathy of someone who'd never lost anything that mattered. But at some point, we all have to move forward. Adeline felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise in her chest, the sensation she'd grown to associate with Sarah's visits. But before she could respond, Lucas tugged at her skirt. Grandma, can we put the angel on top of the tree like we did last time? The angel is already on the tree, sweetheart. But it's crooked, see? He pointed to the ceramic angel that had crowned their Christmas trees for 30 years. Dad always lets me fix it. Sarah's voice cut across the moment like a blade. "Lucas, we don't touch other people's decorations without permission. That angel is probably very old and fragile." "It's fine," Adeline started, but Sarah was already redirecting. "Emma, why don't you help your grandmother in the kitchen? Lucas, sit down and try not to touch anything else." The orchestration was flawless as always. Sarah had managed to position herself as the reasonable adult managing unruly children and an elderly woman who couldn't be trusted with her own hosting duties. David stood frozen in the middle of the room, his phone still clutched in his hand like a lifeline. "Actually," Adeline said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, "everything is ready. We can sit down whenever you're comfortable." "Wonderful, David. Help your mother bring things to the table. Emma, make sure Lucas washes his hands properly. I don't trust these old pipes to get the water hot enough." As they moved toward the dining room, Adeline caught a glimpse through the window of Jake Morrison. He'd returned to his wood splitting, but his movements seemed more deliberate now, each swing of the axe measured and controlled. Something about his presence, steady and watchful from across the fence line, gave her a small measure of comfort. The family gathered around Harold's grandmother's table, the good china reflecting the soft glow of the chandelier she'd cleaned that morning. Lucas bounced in his chair. Emma sat with the careful posture of someone trying to be invisible, and David carved the turkey with hands that shook slightly. Sarah surveyed the spread, with the expression of a food critic preparing her review. "Well," Sarah said, settling her napkin across her lap with practiced elegance, "this should be interesting." Adeline took her seat at the head of the table, Harold's old place, and folded her hands in her lap. Through the window behind David's shoulder, she could see the Morrison house, its windows golden with lamplight. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began to chime the hour. Christmas dinner was about to begin, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this meal would change everything. The question was whether she was ready for whatever came next. The grace was Harold's tradition. Brief, heartfelt, acknowledging both abundance and absence. Adeline had maintained it faithfully for 5 years, though Sarah's barely concealed impatience always made the words feel rushed. Tonight, as she bowed her head, she caught Lucas sneaking a piece of stuffing from his plate. "We give thanks for family gathered," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, "for the gift of another year together, and for those who remain with us in spirit." "Amen," David murmured, and the children echoed him with the practiced enthusiasm of youth. Sarah's amen came a beat too late, punctuated by the soft clink of her water glass against the table. The first few minutes passed in the choreographed dance of family dinners. Plates passed, compliments offered, children reminded of their manners. Lucas declared the mashed potatoes the best ever, while Emma carefully arranged her food into neat sections, a habit she'd developed during her parents' increasingly frequent arguments. "The turkey is quite moist," Sarah observed, cutting her meat into precise pieces. "Though I do worry about the sodium content in that seasoning blend. David's been working with a nutritionist, you know. High blood pressure runs in his family." David's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Sarah, my blood pressure is fine. Prevention is key, darling. My mother always said that an ounce of prevention—" "Your mother says a lot of things," Adeline found herself saying, then immediately regretted the words. Years of walking on eggshells had finally produced a crack. Sarah's blue eyes sharpened with interest. "I'm sorry? I just meant, we all have our family wisdom." Adeline reached for the cranberry sauce, her hands steady despite the internal earthquake. Through the window, she could see Jake Morrison moving around his kitchen, his silhouette backlit against warm yellow light. "Of course we do, though some family wisdom is more current than others." Sarah's smile never wavered, but her voice carried the subtle chill that had become familiar over the years. "Speaking of which, Adeline, I noticed you're still using that old roasting pan. I found the most wonderful new ceramic one at Williams-Sonoma. It would make your presentation so much more modern." "I like my roasting pan," Adeline said quietly. "Harold bought it for me our first Christmas." "How sweet. But surely he'd want you to have the best tools available, wouldn't he? I mean, if we're truly honoring his memory." The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her perceptive 12-year-old mind recognizing the adult tension, even if she couldn't name it. Lucas continued eating, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around the table. David cleared his throat. "The food is wonderful, Mom. Just like always." "Thank you, sweetheart." Adeline smiled at her son, noting how his shoulders had tensed, how his jaw worked as if he were grinding his teeth. "Would anyone like more green beans?" "I would," Emma said quickly, perhaps sensing the need to fill the growing silence. As Adeline served her granddaughter, Sarah launched into a detailed account of their recent renovation project. Hardwood floors, designer fixtures, a kitchen island that cost more than most people's cars. The subtext was clear. This was how successful people lived, how David's family had elevated themselves beyond his modest beginnings. "The contractor said our kitchen is now comparable to anything you'd find in the Back Bay," Sarah concluded, dabbing her lips with her napkin. "Of course, it's all about making smart investments in your property value." "That's nice, dear," Adeline replied, though she knew nice wasn't the response Sarah was fishing for. Admiration was the expected currency, followed by questions that would allow Sarah to elaborate on their success and, by extension, Adeline's lack thereof. Lucas chose that moment to reach for his milk glass, his elbow catching the edge of his plate and sending a dinner roll tumbling to the floor. Before anyone could react, he scrambled under the table to retrieve it, emerging red-faced and clutching the slightly battered bread. 5-second rule, he announced cheerfully, preparing to take a bite. Lucas Turner, absolutely not. Sarah's voice cut across the table with surgical precision. Put that down immediately. We don't eat food that's been on the floor. But it's only been 2 seconds, and Grandma's floor is really clean. Lucas. The single word carried enough authority to stop the boy mid-sentence. What did I just tell you? Adeline watched her grandson's face fall, his natural exuberance deflating under his mother's disapproval. Something in his expression, resignation mixed with confusion, reminded her too sharply of David at that age, learning to navigate his father's occasional dark moods after too many beers. It's just bread, Sarah, she said gently. And he's right, the floor is clean. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah's fork settled against her plate with deliberate precision, her blue eyes finding Adeline's across the table. I'm sorry? I just meant, children will be children. A little germs never hurt anyone. I see. Sarah's voice carried the tone of someone who had discovered something particularly distasteful. So you're suggesting I don't know how to parent my own children? Of course not, because that's what this sounds like. You undermining my authority in front of them. David shifted in his chair, his discomfort palpable. Sarah, I don't think Mom meant. What your mother meant is quite clear, David. She thinks my standards are too high, that I'm too strict with Emma and Lucas. Sarah's gaze never left Adeline's face. Is that it, Adeline? You think I'm a bad mother? The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to be sprung. Adeline could feel Emma and Lucas watching, their young faces reflecting confusion and growing alarm. David sat frozen, his loyalty split between the two most important women in his life. I think you're a wonderful mother, Adeline said carefully. I just think sometimes. Sometimes what? Through the window, Adeline noticed Jake Morrison had moved to his kitchen sink, his attention seemingly focused on washing dishes. But something about his posture suggested he was aware of the rising voices from next door, his movements slowing as he listened. Sometimes children need room to be children, Adeline finished quietly. That's all. Sarah's laugh was like crystal breaking. Room to be children. How wonderfully old-fashioned. Tell me, Adeline, how did that philosophy work out with David? The words struck like a physical blow. David's face went white, his fork clattering against his plate. Emma drew in a sharp breath, while Lucas looked between the adults with growing anxiety. Sarah, that's enough, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. Is it? Because I think we need to have this conversation. Your mother has been undermining my parenting for years, making little comments, giving the children permission to break the rules I've set. And frankly, I'm tired of pretending it's harmless. Adeline felt something shift inside her chest, a sensation like a dam beginning to crack. Years of swallowed words, of bitten tongues and careful silences, pressed against the barriers she'd built to keep the peace. I have never undermined you, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I love those children more than my own life, and I would never love. Sarah's smile turned predatory. That's exactly the problem, isn't it? You think love means letting children do whatever they want. No boundaries, no consequences, just endless permissiveness. Is that how you raise David? Don't. David's voice carried a warning that Sarah either didn't hear or chose to ignore. Because if so, that explains a lot about his inability to stop. Adeline stood so abruptly that her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. Stop right there. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Lucas seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted in the room's atmosphere. Sarah sat back in her chair, her expression cycling through surprise, calculation, and something that might have been satisfaction. I beg your pardon? You don't get to talk about my son that way. You don't get to sit at my table, eat my food, and tear down the man you claim to love. Adeline's hands were shaking now, but her voice remained steady. And you certainly don't get to use my grandchildren as weapons in whatever game you think you're playing. Sarah's mask slipped completely, revealing something cold and vicious underneath. Game? You think this is a game? You pathetic, bitter old woman, you can't stand that David chose me over you, can you? That he built a life that doesn't revolve around your suffocating need to be needed. Sarah. David's voice cracked like a whip across the table, but she was beyond hearing him now. Look at you, clinging to your dead husband's memory, setting places for ghosts, living in the past because you're too weak and too small to build a future. Is it any wonder your son can barely stand to visit? The slap came without conscious thought, Adeline's palm connecting with Sarah's cheek with a sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. Sarah's head snapped to the side, her perfectly styled hair falling across her face as she stared at Adeline in shock. For a moment, nobody moved. Emma's eyes were wide with terror, Lucas had begun to cry quietly, and David sat frozen in his chair like a man watching his world collapse in slow motion. Then Sarah touched her cheek, her fingers coming away without blood but with something far more dangerous. Absolute fury. You hit me. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the promise of consequences. In front of my children, you actually hit me. Adeline began, but the words died in her throat as she realized what she'd done. In 50 years of marriage, she'd never raised a hand to Harold. In 30 years of teaching, she'd never struck a student. The violence was so foreign to her nature that she stared at her own palm in disbelief. Get up! Sarah's command cut through the shocked silence. Emma, Lucas, we're leaving. Now. Sarah, wait. David started to rise, but his wife was already moving, her movements sharp and purposeful as she gathered her purse and coat. Don't. Just don't. She turned to face Adeline, her cheek bearing the red outline of fingerprints. You've shown your true colors tonight. We're done here. Done with you. Done with your house. Done with your poisonous influence on my children. Emma began to cry as Sarah hauled her from her chair, while Lucas clung to his sister with the desperate grip of a child who doesn't understand why the adults are acting like strangers. Please, Adeline whispered, reaching toward her grandchildren. Don't do this. They're just babies. They're my babies, Sarah snarled, positioning herself between Adeline and the children like a shield. And I will never, ever let you hurt them the way you've hurt this family. David finally found his voice. Sarah, you can't just... I can't what? Protect my children from abuse? Because that's what this was, David. Your mother assaulted me in front of our kids. If you can't see that, if you're too weak to stand up for your own wife... She let the threat hang unfinished. Through the window, Adeline could see Jake Morrison standing perfectly still at his kitchen sink, his attention focused on their house with the intensity of a man trained to assess threats. Something about his presence, solid and watchful, kept her from falling apart completely. Sarah herded the children toward the door, Emma's sobs mixing with Lucas's confused questions. David followed like a man walking toward his own execution, his face a mask of anguish and indecision. "Choose, David," Sarah's voice carried back from the hallway. "Her or us. But you can't have both. Not anymore." The front door slammed with enough force to rattle the windows, followed by the sound of car doors and Sarah's voice giving sharp instructions. David's BMW started with its usual purr, and then they were gone, leaving behind only the scent of cooling food and the echo of words that could never be taken back. Adeline stood alone in her dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of what was supposed to be a perfect Christmas dinner. Harold's grandmother's china reflected the light from the chandelier, the turkey sat half-carved on its platter, and somewhere in the distance, church bells continued their evening hymn as if the world hadn't just split open at the seams. Her right hand still tingled where it had connected with Sarah's cheek, and she stared at it in wonder and horror. After a lifetime of keeping peace, of swallowing words and biting her tongue, she had finally snapped. The question now was whether she could live with the consequences. The silence pressed against Adeline's eardrums like deep water. She stood motionless in her dining room, afraid that any movement might shatter what remained of her composure. The grandfather clock in the hallway marked each second with mechanical indifference. Tick, 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 while the smell of cooling turkey and untouched sides filled the air with the ghost of what Christmas dinner should have been. Her legs gave out without warning, depositing her heavily in Harold's chair at the head of the table. The impact sent a tremor through the china, and she watched a water glass teeter dangerously before settling back into place. Even her furniture seemed to understand that everything balanced on a knife's edge now. The tears came in waves, each one carrying years of suppressed hurt and frustration. She'd always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts and found common ground. Teachers didn't slap people. Grandmothers didn't strike their daughter-in-law at Christmas dinner. Good women, the kind Harold had married, the kind who volunteered at church and baked cookies for school fundraisers, didn't lose control like that. But God, it had felt good for just a moment. The shock on Sarah's face, the sudden silence, the brief instant when the balance of power had shifted. Then reality crashed back, bringing with it the image of Lucas's tears and Emma's terrified expression. She pushed herself up from the table, her movements mechanical as she began clearing dishes. The turkey sat half-carved, its golden skin now waxy under the dining room lights. Harold's carving knife lay abandoned beside it, the blade stained with juice and her own failure to keep the family together. The sound of her front door opening made her freeze, a plate trembling in her hands. Had David come back? Had he finally found the courage to stand up to his wife? But the footsteps were too heavy, too measured. "Mrs. Turner?" The voice was deep, careful, with the slight gravel of someone who didn't speak often. "Ma'am, it's Jake Morrison." From next door. She set the plate down with shaking hands and walked to the living room, where she found him standing just inside the doorway. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized, his weathered face bearing the kind of lines that came from squinting against desert sun and wind. His gray eyes took in the scene. Her tear-streaked face, the formal dress now wrinkled, the dining room visible behind her with its tableau of interrupted celebration. "I heard the shouting," he said quietly. "Wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm fine." The lie came automatically, a social reflex as ingrained as breathing, but something in his expression, patient, non-judgmental, like a medic assessing casualties, made her add, "No, that's not true. I'm not fine at all." He nodded as if he'd expected that answer. "Mind if I come in properly?" "Standing in doorways makes me nervous." She stepped back, gesturing him into the living room. He moved with the careful economy of someone whose body had been rebuilt after trauma, favoring his left leg slightly. When he settled onto Harold's old reading chair, she noticed how his eyes automatically cataloged the room's exits and sightlines. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Been watching your house for a while now," he said without preamble. Not in a creepy way, just keeping an eye out. Military habit. You notice patterns, changes in routine. What kind of patterns? The question escaped before she could stop it. The way your car stays in the driveway longer after they visit. How you don't put your Christmas lights up until later each year. The way you check your phone constantly for about a week after family dinners. His voice remained matter-of-fact, clinical. Saw the whole thing tonight through my kitchen window. Her hitting you hitting back, them leaving. Heat flooded her cheeks. She didn't hit me, not physically. I was the one who, ma'am. The single word stopped her mid-sentence. I've seen enough combat to recognize warfare when I see it. What happened in there wasn't about a dinner roll or parenting styles. That was a systematic attack designed to break you down. The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. She sank onto the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I lost control. In 67 years, I've never struck another person. Sometimes losing control is the only way to survive. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees. You want to talk about what's been happening? Because from where I sit, this has been building for a long time. And somehow, impossibly, she found herself talking. The words poured out like water from a burst dam. Years of small cruelties disguised as helpfulness, the gradual isolation from her grandchildren, the way Sarah made her feel simultaneously invisible and under constant scrutiny. Jake listened without interruption, his gray eyes steady on her face. When she finished, the silence stretched between them again, but this time it felt different, less empty, more expectant. You're not going crazy, he said finally. What you described, that's psychological warfare, designed to make you question your own reality, your own worth. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. Question is, what are you going to do about it? The question hung in the air long after Jake Morrison had quietly let himself out, leaving behind only the faint scent of winter air and sawdust from his afternoon wood splitting. Adeline stood at her living room window, watching his kitchen light flicker on across the narrow strip of yard that separated their houses. What was she going to do about it? The days after Christmas crawled by with the oppressive weight of waiting for something. An apology, an explanation, some acknowledgement that the world had shifted on its axis. But David's silence stretched on, broken only by the phantom vibrations of her phone that turned out to be wishful thinking. She found herself checking her messages compulsively, each empty screen another confirmation that her family had closed ranks without her. On the third day, she dialed David's office number, her finger hovering over the final digit before she lost her nerve. What would she say? That she was sorry for defending herself? That she missed Emma and Lucas so desperately it felt like a physical ache? That she lay awake at night replaying every moment of Christmas dinner, searching for the words that might have prevented the explosion? The sound of hammering from outside drew her to the kitchen window. Jake Morrison crouched on her front porch, his toolbox open beside him as he worked on the loose board she'd been meaning to fix since October. He moved with methodical precision, each nail driven home with exactly the right number of strikes. When he finished, he tested the repair with his weight, nodding with satisfaction before gathering his tools. She opened the front door as he descended the steps. Captain Morrison, you didn't need to. Jake, he corrected, settling his toolbox on the ground. And yes, I did. Board was about to give way completely. Somebody could have gotten hurt. The implication hung between them, that he'd been watching, assessing, protecting. Part of her should have felt invaded. But instead she found his quiet vigilance oddly comforting. Can I offer you coffee? The words escaped before she could second-guess them. I just made a fresh pot. He studied her face for a moment, as if weighing something. Coffee sounds good. Her kitchen felt different, with Jake Morrison sitting at her small breakfast table, his large frame making her delicate furniture seem fragile. He drank his coffee black, holding the mug between work-roughened hands that bore the kind of scars that came from real labor, not the soft calluses of weekend gardening. Heard from your son yet? The question was asked without preamble, in the same matter-of-fact tone he might use to comment on the weather. No. The admission came out smaller than she'd intended. I keep thinking he'll call. That he'll want to explain, or... She trailed off, unable to voice the desperate hope that David might choose her side for once. He won't. The certainty in Jake's voice made her look up from her untouched coffee. How can you be so sure? Because he's been enabling this behavior for years. Breaking that pattern means admitting he's been wrong, that he's let his mother be abused under his watch. That's a hard truth for a man to face. Jake set down his mug with deliberate care. Easier to tell himself you were out of line. That Sarah was just defending herself. The words hit like physical blows, but Adeline recognized their truth. She'd seen that same willful blindness in David's father during his drinking years, the elaborate mental gymnastics required to avoid confronting painful realities. She'll be working on him now, Jake continued, his gray eyes fixed on something beyond the window, reinforcing her version of events, making sure he understands what happened was your fault, not hers. You seem to know a lot about this. The observation came out sharper than she'd intended, but Jake didn't seem offended. Had a buddy overseas. Good soldier, but his wife, she was like your daughter-in-law. Always calling during missions, crying about how lonely she was, how he wasn't supporting her enough. Made him feel guilty for serving his country. Jake's jaw tightened slightly. By the time he got home, she'd convinced him that everything wrong with their marriage was his fault. Took 2 years and a hell of a lot of therapy before he saw through it. What happened to them? Divorced. She tried to take the kids, turn them against him. Failed, but not for lack of trying. Jake met her eyes across the table. Point is, this kind of manipulation, it's a pattern. And patterns can be broken, but it takes work. A car door slammed in her driveway, and Adeline's heart leaped with hope. But through the window, she saw Helen Morrison stepping carefully across the icy walkway, a covered dish balanced in her hands. That'll be my mother, Jake said, rising from the table. Fair warning. She's not exactly subtle. Helen Morrison entered like a small, determined hurricane, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the winter wind. At 72, she moved with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd spent decades managing military households and wouldn't be slowing down anytime soon. Adeline, honey. She set the dish on the counter and enveloped Adeline in a hug that smelled of vanilla and determination. Jake told me what happened. That woman should be ashamed of herself. Mrs. Morrison, you really didn't need to. Helen, and yes, I did. Nobody should spend the week after Christmas eating leftovers alone. She lifted the lid to reveal a perfectly golden coffee cake. Besides, I've been wanting to get to know you better. Hard to do when that son of mine barely talks to the neighbors. Jake muttered something that might have been a protest, but Helen ignored him with the practiced ease of long maternal experience. Sit, she commanded Adeline, already moving toward the coffee pot. Jacob, make yourself useful and cut that cake. As Jake obediently retrieved plates from the cabinet, somehow knowing exactly where to find them, Helen settled beside Adeline with the air of someone preparing for a serious conversation. 47 years of military life teaches you to spot trouble, she said without preamble. That girl's been causing problems for a while now, hasn't she? I don't want to speak badly of David's wife. Honey, sometimes speaking the truth isn't the same as speaking badly. Helen's blue eyes, so like her son's but warmer, held steady on Adeline's face. Jacob says she's been systematically isolating you from those grandbabies. The phrase hit Adeline like cold water. Systematic. As if Sarah's behavior had been planned, calculated. I assumed I was being too sensitive. That maybe I was overstepping. Bullshit. The profanity coming from Helen's well-bred lips was startling. Sorry, but that's military wife talking. We learn to call things what they are. That woman has been waging psychological warfare on you, and it's time somebody said so. Jake set plates of cake in front of them, his movements careful. Mom. Don't mom me, Jacob Morrison. This woman has been suffering in silence while her own family manipulates her into thinking she's the problem. Helen turned back to Adeline, her voice gentling. How long since you've seen those children without her supervision? The question forced Adeline to think back through months of carefully orchestrated visits. Not since Lucas's birthday in October. And even then, she stayed the whole time. And before that? Maybe Emma's school play in September? But Sarah said the seating was limited, and I should let the nuclear family sit together. Helen and Jake exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Helen reached across the table to cover Adeline's hand with her own. Honey, that's not normal family behavior. That's control. And control like that doesn't happen overnight. It builds, piece by piece, until you can't remember what normal felt like anymore. Tears threatened again, but these felt different. Not the helpless sobs of Christmas night, but something cleaner, sharper. I miss them so much. Emma's been having nightmares, and Lucas still can't tie his shoes properly. I used to help with things like that. You still can, Jake said quietly. But it means making some hard choices about what you're willing to accept. The grandfather clock chimed the hour, and Helen glanced at her watch. I should let you get some rest. But Adeline? She waited until she had full attention. You're not alone in this anymore. Sometimes it takes a village to fight back against a bully. After they left, Adeline sat in her quiet kitchen, staring at the half-eaten coffee cake. Through the window, she could see Jake moving around his garage, organizing tools with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. The porch light over his back door cast a warm glow across the snow, steady and reassuring. For the first time in days, she felt something other than despair stirring in her chest. Not hope exactly, but something harder, more durable. The phone sat silent on her counter, but maybe that was okay. Maybe silence was better than the careful, apologetic words she'd been rehearsing. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for her son to choose her and start choosing herself. New Year's Eve arrived with the weight of unfinished business pressing against Adeline's chest like a physical force. She'd spent the week since Helen Morrison's visit moving through her house like a woman taking inventory, touching Harold's books, straightening photos, preparing for something she couldn't yet name. The silence from David's family had crystallized into certainty. If she wanted answers, she would have to demand them. The decision came at 2:47 a.m. on December 31st, jerking her awake with the clarity that sometimes visits in the darkest hours. She would not spend another year wondering, waiting, hoping for scraps of her son's attention. She would not let Sarah Turner dictate the terms of her relationship with her own grandchildren. By 8 a.m., she was dialing David's office number, her hands steady despite the hammering of her heart. Turner Architecture, this is David. His voice, so familiar it made her chest ache, carried the brisk professionalism he used with clients. She almost hung up, but Jake Morrison's words echoed in her memory. Patterns can be broken. David, it's your mother. The pause stretched long enough that she wondered if he'd disconnected the call. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Softer, younger, carrying an uncertainty that reminded her of the boy who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms. Mom, how are you? I need to see you. Today, just you and me. Another pause. I don't think that's a good idea. Sarah's still very upset, and I didn't ask about Sarah. I asked to see my son. The words came out stronger than she felt, backed by a resolve that surprised her. 1 hour, David. Surely our relationship is worth 1 hour of your time. She heard him moving papers, the soft click of his computer keys. I have a site visit at 3, but I could meet you here at the office around 1:30. I'll be there. The drive to David's office felt like traveling through a landscape she no longer recognized. Streets where she'd taught him to drive, where they'd walked to buy school supplies, where Harold had taken him for father-son haircuts at Murphy's barbershop. All of it looked the same but felt different, viewed through the lens of her new understanding. Turner Architecture occupied the ground floor of a renovated Victorian in the historic district, all exposed brick and carefully preserved original details. David had built his practice slowly, deliberately, choosing restoration projects that honored the past while serving the present. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her son could breathe new life into old buildings but couldn't seem to repair the fractures in his own family. She found him standing at the window of his private office, his reflection ghost-like against the winter afternoon. He turned when she knocked, and the sight of his face, drawn, older, marked by exhaustion, made her maternal instincts flare despite everything. "You look tired," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I haven't been sleeping well." He sat down heavily, his architect's hands fidgeting with a pencil. "Mom, about Christmas. Let me speak first." The interruption came gently but firmly. "I've spent the last week thinking about what happened, and I need you to hear some things." David's mouth closed, his brown eyes, Harold's eyes, focusing on her with an attention she hadn't received from him in years. "I was wrong to slap Sarah. Violence is never acceptable, and I'm deeply sorry it happened in front of Emma and Lucas." She paused, letting the apology settle between them. "But I'm not sorry for defending myself. And I'm not sorry for finally telling the truth about what's been happening in this family. Mom, Sarah wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She was systematically tearing me down, David. Piece by piece, comment by comment, until I questioned my own worth as a mother and grandmother." Adeline leaned forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Tell me, when was the last time I saw Emma and Lucas without Sarah present?" David's pencil stilled. What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I asked. When did I last spend time alone with my grandchildren?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. She watched her son's face as he mentally catalogued visits, birthday parties, school events. Watched understanding dawn in his expression, like sunrise breaking through clouds. It's been a while," he admitted quietly. "It's been 8 months, David. 8 months since Sarah has allowed me to be alone with those children for more than 5 minutes." The statistics felt like stones in her mouth. "Every visit supervised. Every conversation monitored. Every gift I give them filtered through her approval. She's just protective. After her own childhood. Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Don't use Sarah's past to excuse her behavior toward me. I've been nothing but respectful, supportive, and loving toward her for 15 years. What has she given me in return?" David's hands moved restlessly across his desk, straightening papers that were already straight. She feels like you disapprove of her parenting. Based on what evidence? What have I ever said or done to make her feel that way?" You undermined her at Christmas. With the dinner roll thing. Adeline felt something cold settle in her stomach. "I suggested a 5-second rule for bread that fell on a clean floor. That's undermining her parenting?" "She has rules, Mom. Structure. The kids need their grandmother." The words came out with quiet force. "They need someone who loves them unconditionally, who remembers their favorite stories, who teaches them to bake cookies and build blanket forts." When did wanting to be part of their lives become a threat to their mother? David was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond the window. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years. "She says you try to spoil them, that you don't respect our authority as parents. And you believe her?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. David's face cycled through emotions. Guilt, defensiveness, something that might have been recognition. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he whispered. Adeline felt her heart break a little at the confession. Her strong, capable son reduced to confusion and self-doubt by the woman who was supposed to support him. "Let me ask you something else," she said gently. "Are you happy, David?" The question clearly caught him off guard. His mouth opened, then closed. He started to nod, then stopped. What kind of question is that?" "A simple one. In your marriage, in your daily life, are you happy?" Happiness it's not that simple. Marriage is work, compromise. What do you compromise, David? What does Sarah compromise? The silence that followed was answer enough. Adeline watched her son's face as pieces began falling into place. The careful monitoring of his phone calls, the criticism of his work schedule, the way Sarah made decisions and presented them as joint choices. "She loves me," he said finally, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "I'm sure she does, in her way. But love shouldn't feel like walking on eggshells. Love shouldn't require you to choose between your wife and your mother. She didn't make me choose. She just..." What did she say to you in the car that night, David? Another silence. Longer this time, heavy with implications. She said I had to decide what kind of man I wanted to be, whether I was going to let my mother disrespect my wife and children. And what did you decide? David's composure finally cracked. His shoulders shook as tears he'd been holding back for a week finally broke free. I decided I was tired of being caught in the middle. Tired of feeling like I was failing everyone no matter what I did. He looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. But I don't know how to fix it, Mom. I don't know how to make everyone happy. Adeline rose from her chair and moved around the desk, gathering her son into the kind of hug she hadn't been allowed to give him in years. He was taller than Harold had been, broader through the shoulders, but in that moment he felt like the little boy who used to run to her with scraped knees and broken toys. You can't make everyone happy, sweetheart. You can only decide what kind of life you want to live and what kind of father you want to be. She pulled back to meet his eyes. But you need to understand something. I will not continue to accept being treated as the enemy in my own son's life. I won't be the villain in Sarah's story just to keep the peace. David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. What does that mean? It means I'm done walking on eggshells. Done pretending that being insulted and diminished is normal family behavior. Done accepting that my love for my grandchildren is somehow dangerous or inappropriate. She returned to her chair, her posture straight and determined. I'm not asking you to choose between us, David. I'm asking you to stand up for what's right. And if I can't? The question pierced her heart, but she kept her voice steady. Then I'll know where I stand, and I'll plan my life accordingly. Before David could respond, the sound of a car door slamming outside made them both turn toward the window. Sarah's BMW sat in the parking lot, its engine still running, exhaust visible in the cold air. She followed me, David said, his voice hollow with resignation. She probably tracked my phone. Through the window, they watched Sarah stride toward the building with the determined gait of someone prepared for battle. Her coat was designer perfect, her hair styled despite the wind, her face set in lines of righteous anger. This is it, Adeline said quietly. This is where you decide what kind of man you want to be. The front door of the office chimed as Sarah entered, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors with military precision. David stood frozen behind his desk, caught between the two women who had shaped his adult life in such different ways. Sarah appeared in the doorway like an avenging angel, her blue eyes blazing with fury and something that might have been fear. What the hell is she doing here? The question cracked through David's office like a whip, transforming the space from sanctuary into battlefield. Sarah stood framed in the doorway, her designer coat still perfect despite her obvious haste. But something wild flickered behind her composed exterior. Her gaze moved between David and Adeline with the calculating assessment of a general surveying enemy positions. Sarah, please, David started, but she cut him off with a raised hand. Don't. Just don't. She stepped fully into the room, claiming territory with each measured stride. I specifically told you not to have contact with her until we'd worked through this as a family. And yet, here you are, having secret meetings behind my back. It wasn't secret, Adeline said quietly, remaining seated despite every instinct telling her to stand. I called your husband at his office and asked to speak with him. That's what families do. They communicate. Sarah's laugh was like glass breaking. Families? Is that what you think we are? She turned to David with an expression of wounded betrayal. Do you see what she's doing? Playing the victim, making me look like the unreasonable one. This is exactly what I warned you about. David stood behind his desk like a man caught between advancing armies, his face pale and drawn. Sarah, you followed me here. You tracked my phone. To protect our family. To protect our children from more of her manipulation. Sarah's voice rose, carrying the edge of hysteria she'd carefully hidden for so long. She assaulted me, David, in front of Emma and Lucas. And now she's trying to turn you against me. I'm trying to understand what happened to my relationship with my son, Adeline replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. When did wanting to spend time with my grandchildren become a crime? When you started undermining everything we've built. When you started teaching my children that rules don't matter, that they don't have to respect their parents, authority. Sarah's composure was unraveling thread by thread. You want to spoil them, turn them against me, just like you've been trying to turn David against me for 15 years. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. David's mouth opened, then closed, his loyalty fractured between truth and conditioning. 15 years. Adeline repeated slowly. Tell me, Sarah, what exactly have I done to turn David against you? What evidence do you have of this campaign you've imagined? Imagined? Sarah's voice climbed another octave. You've never approved of me, never thought I was good enough for your precious son. From the moment we met, you've been waiting for us to fail. That's not true. Isn't it? You've questioned every decision we've made. The house we bought, the schools we chose, the way I discipline the children. Nothing is ever good enough for the great Adeline Turner. David finally found his voice. Sarah, that's not. Mom has always been supportive. Supportive? Sarah whirled to face him. She criticized the preschool we chose for Emma. Said Lucas needed more creative playtime. Told me I was too structured, too rigid. That's not support, David. That's sabotage. Adeline felt pieces clicking into place, years of careful misinterpretation becoming clear. I made suggestions, gentle ones based on 30 years of teaching children. That's what grandmothers do. What grandmothers do is respect boundaries. What they don't do is undermine the parents at every opportunity. Sarah's voice carried the righteousness of someone who'd rehearsed this speech. But you've never understood boundaries, have you? You still act like David is your little boy, like I'm just some interloper who stole him away. The words hit their target with surgical precision. Adeline felt the familiar burn of shame, the old doubt that maybe she was too involved, too needy, too much. But Jake Morrison's voice echoed in her memory. Psychological warfare designed to make you question your own reality. You're right, Adeline said quietly. I do still see David as my son, because that's what he is. That doesn't change when he gets married. It just means our family grows. Our family? Sarah's voice turned dangerous. Let me be very clear about something, Adeline. David and Emma and Lucas are my family. You are an extended relative who visits occasionally. There's a difference. The silence that followed was deafening. David stood frozen, his face cycling through shock, recognition, and something that might have been horror. Through the window, afternoon shadows were growing longer, and somewhere in the distance, church bells marked the hour. Did you just tell me that my son isn't part of my family? Adeline's voice remained calm, but something steel-hard had entered it. Sarah lifted her chin defiantly. I told you the truth about priorities. David made his choice 15 years ago when he married me. Children grow up, Mrs. Turner. They leave their parents and start their own lives. It's time you accepted that. Sarah. David's voice cracked like breaking wood. You can't. You don't get to decide who's in my family. I'm not deciding anything. I'm stating facts. Sarah's mask was completely off now, revealing the calculating manipulator beneath. You have responsibilities to your wife and children that come before your mother's emotional needs. If you can't see that, if you're too weak to prioritize properly. She let the threat hang unfinished, but its implications filled the room like smoke. Choose me or lose everything you care about. The ultimatum that had shaped their marriage for years, finally spoken aloud. David's phone buzzed against his desk, the sound abnormally loud in the tense quiet. He glanced down, and his face went white. What is it? Sarah demanded. Emma. His voice was barely a whisper. She's asking if Grandma is okay. If we're getting divorced. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her perfect composure cracked completely, revealing something desperate and afraid underneath. What did you tell them about Christmas? David continued, his voice gaining strength. What exactly did you say to explain why we left Grandma's house? I told them the truth, that their grandmother lost control and became violent. That we had to protect them from what? From someone who loves them unconditionally? David's voice rose for the first time in the conversation. From their grandmother, who remembers their favorite songs and makes them cookies and never misses sending birthday cards. From someone who doesn't respect their parents' authority. By suggesting Lucas could eat a dinner roll that fell on a clean floor, the question came out with quiet devastation. That's the disrespect that justified cutting her out of their lives? Sarah's breathing had become rapid, shallow. Her carefully constructed reality was crumbling, and panic flickered across her features. "You're doing it again," she said desperately. "Both of you, ganging up on me, making me the villain. This is exactly what I've been trying to protect our family from." Adeline stood slowly, her movements deliberate. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I have loved my son since the day he was born. I have supported his choices, welcomed you into our family, and done everything I could to be the mother-in-law you needed me to be. But I will not be the scapegoat for whatever dysfunction exists in your marriage." "Dysfunction?" Sarah's voice climbed toward hysteria. "Our marriage was fine until you started your campaign to stop." David's command cut across her words with surprising authority. "Just stop." The change in his voice made both women turn toward him. He stood straighter now, his architect's hands steady on his desk, his brown eyes clear for the first time in years. "Emma is 12 years old, and she's asking if her parents are getting divorced. Lucas is 8, and he's been having nightmares since Christmas. My mother is sitting in her house alone, wondering if she'll ever see her grandchildren again." His voice carried the weight of accumulated pain. "And all of it, started because she suggested a 5-second rule for bread." Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but David held up a hand. "I'm not finished. For 15 years, I've watched you find fault with everything my mother does. Her cooking, her decorating, her parenting advice, her gifts to the children. Nothing is ever right. Nothing is ever enough. And I've enabled it because I was too much of a coward to admit what was really happening. David, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years." He looked directly at his mother, and she saw Harold's strength finally emerging in her son's face. "Mom, I owe you an apology, not just for Christmas night, but for every time I let you be diminished in your own home, every time I chose peace over truth, every time I failed to protect you the way you protected me my whole life." The words hung in the air like a benediction. Through the window, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, New Year's Eve celebrations were beginning. But in David's office, a different kind of resolution was taking shape, the kind that comes when truth finally finds its voice after years of silence. Sarah's face cycled through emotions like a broken kaleidoscope: shock, rage, calculation, and finally something that looked like genuine fear. For a moment, the room held its breath, waiting to see which version of her would emerge. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, her voice carrying the cold certainty of someone issuing a promise rather than a threat. "Both of you." She turned on her heel and left without another word, her footsteps echoing through the empty building with military precision. Through the window, they watched her BMW reverse aggressively out of the parking space, tires squealing against asphalt as she disappeared into the gathering dusk. David sank into his chair as if his strings had been cut, the adrenaline of confrontation leaving him hollow and shaking. "What have I done?" "What you should have done years ago," Adeline replied, moving around the desk to place a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You chose truth over convenience. That's never the wrong choice, even when it's the hardest one." But Sarah's parting words proved prophetic. The war she'd promised began within hours. The first salvo came at 11 p.m. on New Year's Eve, just as Adeline was settling into bed with a cup of tea and the strange peace that follows difficult decisions. Her phone rang with David's number, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Mom, Sarah's filed a complaint with the police. She's claiming you assaulted her at Christmas dinner and that I'm an unfit father for exposing the children to violence." Adeline's teacup rattled against its saucer as she set it down. "Can she do that?" "She already has. Detective Santos called me 20 minutes ago. She wants to speak with both of us tomorrow." Through her bedroom window, Adeline could see Jake Morrison's house, lights burning late into the new year. Something about his steady presence across the fence line gave her courage. "Then we'll speak with her. We'll tell the truth." "What if that's not enough? What if Sarah convinces them that you're dangerous, that the children aren't safe around you?" David's voice cracked with exhaustion. She's already called my office, Mom. Left a message with my secretary about, concerning family incidents, affecting my professional judgment. The methodical destruction had begun, each attack precisely calculated to cause maximum damage. But Sarah had made one crucial error. She'd escalated to official channels, and Detective Maria Santos was nobody's fool. The detective arrived at Adeline's house the next morning, with the professional demeanor of someone who'd seen every variation of family dysfunction. She was younger than Adeline had expected, perhaps 35, with intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing, and a way of listening that made people want to tell the truth. "Mrs. Turner, I'm Detective Santos. I understand there was an incident on Christmas Day that resulted in a complaint being filed. Please, come in. Would you like coffee?" "That would be nice, thank you." They settled in the living room, the same space where Jake Morrison had first offered his support just over a week ago. Detective Santos pulled out a small notebook but kept it closed, her attention focused entirely on Adeline's face. "Why don't you tell me what happened that night?" "In your own words, take your time." Adeline found herself recounting the entire evening. The careful preparations, Sarah's escalating criticisms, the moment when protecting Lucas from his mother's harshness had triggered the explosion. Detective Santos listened without interruption, occasionally nodding but never passing judgment. "You slapped her," the detective said when Adeline finished. "Yes, I lost control, and I'm deeply sorry for that. It was wrong, regardless of what she said to me." "What exactly did she say to you? The words that preceded the physical contact?" Adeline closed her eyes, remembering. "She called me a pathetic, bitter old woman. Said David could barely stand to visit me, that I was too weak and small to build a future." The words still stung, even in repetition. "But that doesn't excuse what I did." Detective Santos made a note. "After you struck her, what happened?" "She gathered the children and left. David went with them. That was the last I saw of my grandchildren." "And since then?" "Nothing. Complete silence until yesterday, when David and I met at his office to talk." "His wife showed up during that meeting?" "Yes. She tracked his phone, I think. She was very angry." Detective Santos's pen moved across the page with quick, efficient strokes. "Mrs. Turner, I need to ask you directly. Have you ever struck your daughter-in-law before? Ever threatened her? Made her feel unsafe in any way?" "Never. Not in 15 years of knowing her." "What about your grandchildren? Have you ever disciplined them physically?" "I've never laid a hand on those children except to hug them." The questions continued for another 20 minutes, methodical and thorough. When Detective Santos finally closed her notebook, her expression had shifted subtly from professional neutrality to something that might have been understanding. "Mrs. Turner, I'm going to be honest with you. Mrs. Sarah Turner's complaint paints a picture of an unstable, violent woman who poses a danger to children. But the person I'm talking to doesn't match that description at all." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm going to do my job properly. Interview witnesses, examine evidence, look at patterns of behavior." Detective Santos stood, straightening her jacket. "Is there anyone who might have observed the incident or the events leading up to it?" Adeline's heart jumped. "My neighbor, Captain Morrison. He saw everything through his kitchen window. I'll need his contact information." An hour later, Jake Morrison sat across from Detective Santos in his own Spartan living room, his posture military straight, and his answers precise as surgical instruments. "I witnessed the entire confrontation through Mrs. Turner's dining room window," he confirmed. "The physical contact lasted approximately 2 seconds. Mrs. Turner immediately stepped back and appeared shocked by her own actions." "What about the verbal altercation preceding the slap?" "Mrs. Sarah Turner engaged in what I recognized as systematic psychological harassment. Personal attacks designed to humiliate and break down Mrs. Turner's emotional defenses." Detective Santos looked up from her notes. "You sound like you have experience with this kind of behavior." 3 tours in Afghanistan. I've seen interrogation techniques designed to break down prisoners of war. What I witnessed that night employed similar tactics. Isolate the target, attack their sense of self-worth, make them question their own reality. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Morrison. It's an accurate assessment, Jake replied without hesitation. I've been documenting incidents for over 6 months. The detective's eyebrows rose. Documenting how? Jake moved to a filing cabinet and withdrew a thick folder. Dates, times, duration of visits. Frequency of Mrs. Turner's phone calls to her son. Observable stress indicators in Mrs. Turner following family interactions. He handed the folder to Detective Santos. I have PTSD, Detective. Hypervigilance is part of my condition. I notice things. As Detective Santos flipped through pages of meticulous observations, Jake's military training evident in every precise notation, a fuller picture began to emerge. The gradual isolation of Adeline from her grandchildren, the increasing frequency of her visible distress after family visits, the systematic erosion of a woman who'd once been confident and capable. This is remarkably thorough, Detective Santos said. Old habits, but it might be relevant now. It's very relevant. She closed the folder carefully. Mr. Morrison, would you be willing to provide a formal statement about what you've observed? Yes, ma'am. That afternoon brought another interview, this time with David, who sat in Detective Santos's office looking like a man slowly waking up from a long, troubled sleep. Your wife claims your mother has been undermining your marriage for years, Detective Santos said, that she's manipulative and controlling. What's your take on that? David was quiet for a long moment. A week ago, I might have agreed with her. But now... He shook his head. My mother is the most selfless person I know. She raised me alone after my father died, worked 2 jobs to put me through college, never missed a school play or soccer game. The idea that she's manipulative is... He struggled for words. It's like saying the sky is green. Then why did your wife believe it? Because I let her. The admission came out like a confession. Every time Mom suggested something different, every time she offered advice or wanted to help, Sarah would get upset. It was easier to ask Mom to back off than to deal with Sarah's reaction. He looked up at Detective Santos with haunted eyes. I've been choosing the path of least resistance for 15 years, and my mother paid the price. Detective Santos made more notes. Tell me about your children's relationship with their grandmother. David's face softened. They adore her. Emma still calls her when she has nightmares. Lucas asks for Grandma's pancakes every weekend, but Sarah's been limiting their contact, always finding reasons why visits need to be supervised or cut short. How do they seem after visiting their grandmother? Happy, relaxed, like kids should be. His voice cracked slightly. Emma's been asking me why Mommy doesn't like Grandma. I didn't know how to answer that. What about since Christmas night? How are they handling the separation? They're confused, scared. Emma thinks she did something wrong. Lucas keeps asking when he can see Grandma again. David buried his face in his hands. I've made such a mess of everything. Detective Santos closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair. Mr. Turner, I'm going to ask you directly. Do you believe your mother poses any danger to your children? None. Absolutely none. The answer came without hesitation. She's the safest person I know. Then you might want to consider what kind of environment your children are living in now, and whether that's what's best for them. The weight of the detective's words settled over David like a heavy blanket. Outside the police station, January snow was beginning to fall, covering the world in clean white silence. But inside, the machinery of justice was beginning to turn, and for the first time in years, it was turning in favor of truth over manipulation, evidence over accusation. Sarah Turner's complaint was about to backfire in ways she'd never anticipated. Emma's live stream had attracted over 50,000 viewers in the past 20 minutes, with the numbers climbing exponentially as news outlets picked up the story and social media amplified the real-time documentation of a conspiracy being exposed. Comments flooded in from viewers around the world, many from elderly people sharing their own stories of suspicious insurance claim denials and delayed medical treatments. Grandma Vera, look at this, Emma said, pointing to her screen. People are posting from Phoenix, Portland, San Francisco, Denver. Everywhere we identified as having similar patterns. Your investigation isn't just about Seattle. This is happening nationwide. Veronica studied the incoming reports with the methodical attention that had defined her career. Each story followed the same template: elderly patients with valuable assets, legitimate medical needs, insurance claims denied or delayed through bureaucratic manipulation, deaths that occurred precisely when actuarial models predicted they would. It's not just insurance fraud, she realized. It's a coordinated program of asset seizure disguised as healthcare policy. They're using medical necessity as a weapon to eliminate people whose resources they want to control. Dr. Torres was monitoring police scanner frequencies through Emma's equipment, tracking the multiple law enforcement responses now converging on the area: Seattle PD, King County Sheriff, state police, and what sounds like federal agents. The active shooter report has brought everyone. Carlos positioned himself where he could observe both the street and the building's internal corridors, which means our hunters now have to operate in an environment crawling with legitimate law enforcement. That changes their tactical options significantly. But Emma was watching something on her screens that made her expression grow more concerned. The story is spreading, but so is disinformation. Social media accounts are already posting, debunking, videos claiming the whole thing is fabricated. Professional quality content that couldn't have been created this quickly unless it was pre-prepared. Veronica felt the familiar chill of recognizing a sophisticated operation. They have contingency plans for exposure. Media manipulation, disinformation campaigns, probably legal teams ready to file lawsuits claiming defamation. Look at this. Dr. Torres had found additional information through her medical professional networks. Colleagues in other cities are reporting that patients whose cases match our pattern have been contacted by lawyers offering to handle insurance disputes for unusual fee arrangements. Carlos understood the implication immediately. Legal firms working with the insurance companies to tie up families in litigation while the elderly patients die waiting for resolution. Emma's communication systems were now handling messages from journalists, law enforcement agencies, and what appeared to be federal investigators. But she was also receiving threats that were growing more specific and more credible. "Someone just sent me the layout of this building, including structural vulnerabilities," she reported. "They're not just threatening us. They're providing technical information that would only be available to people with access to city planning and engineering databases." Veronica studied the building schematic that Emma displayed. "Emma, this isn't amateur intimidation. Someone with official access to city records is actively supporting the people trying to kill us." The scope of the conspiracy was becoming clearer with each piece of evidence. Not just insurance companies and medical practices, but legal firms, city planning departments, police precincts, medical examiner offices, and possibly federal agencies. A network of corruption that had spent years positioning itself to systematically eliminate elderly populations while seizing their assets. "Incoming call from Detective Sarah Kim," Carlos announced, staring at his secure phone. "Real number this time, according to the caller ID." Emma immediately began recording the call while running trace programs to verify its origin. "Answer it, but assume it's being monitored by multiple parties." Carlos activated the speaker function. "Sarah?" "Carlos, thank God you're alive." The voice was unmistakably Sarah Kim. The right accent, the familiar speech patterns, the emotional tone that suggested genuine relief. "I've been trying to reach you for hours. Are you safe?" "Sarah, where have you been for 2 years? Your death was reported. I went to your funeral." "Witness protection. Federal investigation into the network you stumbled onto. I can't explain over the phone, but I'm 5 minutes away from your location, with backup. We have arrest warrants for Victoria Blackstone and her entire operation." Emma was studying her trace results with growing alarm. "Carlos, the call is coming from a federal building, but it's being routed through multiple relay points. Someone's trying to hide the origin." Dr. Torres looked up from her medical files. "If she's been in witness protection for 2 years investigating this network, why is she surfacing now? Why not stay hidden until the arrests are complete?" Veronica was listening to the call with her investigative instincts at maximum alert. The voice was Sarah Kim. The emotional responses seemed genuine, but the timing was too convenient. "Carlos, ask her something only the real Sarah would know. Something specific from before her supposed death." "Sarah, do you remember what we talked about the night before the accident? Our conversation at the precinct about my corruption investigation?" Brief pause. "You were worried about Lieutenant Webb. You thought he was taking money from someone connected to insurance fraud. I told you to be careful about who you trusted." Carlos met Veronica's eyes. The answer was accurate, but it was also information that could have been obtained from surveillance recordings or corrupted police files. "That's right," Carlos said carefully. "Where do you want to meet?" "Stay where you are. I'm coming to you with federal marshals and Seattle PD officers I've vetted personally. Don't trust anyone else who tries to contact you." The call ended, leaving them in tense silence. Emma's computers were showing multiple law enforcement agencies now operating in the area, but her trace programs had identified something troubling. The call came from a federal building, but the phone number is registered to someone who died 3 months ago. Another manipulation, Veronica concluded. But this one is more sophisticated. They're using official federal resources to coordinate the deception. Carlos was studying police scanner traffic. Multiple agencies responding, but no coordination between them. That's not how joint operations work. Either there's massive communication breakdown or different agencies are working against each other. Dr. Torres had been monitoring news coverage on multiple screens. The story is gaining national attention, but something's wrong with the reporting. Major outlets are focusing on alleged fraud rather than the systematic murder aspect. They're minimizing the story even as they cover it. Emma understood what was happening. Media control. They can't suppress the story completely, but they can shape how it's presented. Make it sound like routine corporate malfeasance instead of systematic genocide. The building's intercom system suddenly activated, broadcasting a calm professional voice. "This is Detective Sarah Kim, Seattle Police Department. I'm in the building with federal agents. We're here to provide protection and take you into custody for your safety. Please respond to identify your location." But Emma's security monitors showed no law enforcement entering the building. The corridors were empty except for a few residents who had ignored the shelter-in-place order. "The voice is coming through the building's PA system, but there's no one in the building," Emma reported. "They're using the intercom to try to get us to reveal our location." Carlos realized they were dealing with an opponent who had prepared for every contingency, including exposure of the conspiracy. They've had years to plan for this scenario. Mock investigations, fake witnesses, corrupted federal agents, media control, public disinformation. They're not just covering up crimes, they're managing the entire narrative around exposure. Veronica was reading the flood of messages coming through Emma's secure channels when she found something that made her blood run cold. "Emma, look at this. It's a legal document filed 20 minutes ago with King County Superior Court." The document declared Veronica Brown mentally incompetent due to age-related dementia, appointed a legal guardian with power of attorney, and authorized immediate psychiatric commitment for her own protection. Similar documents had been filed for Carlos Vega and Dr. Rebecca Torres, citing various mental health concerns that would invalidate their testimony. "They're not just planning to kill us," Veronica realized. "They're planning to discredit us legally so that even if we survive, everything we've discovered becomes inadmissible evidence from unreliable witnesses." Dr. Torres studied her own commitment order with medical professional horror. "These documents claim I've been suffering from work-related stress that has resulted in paranoid delusions about my patients. They have detailed psychiatric evaluations that I never underwent." Emma was tracing the legal filings through her journalism databases. The lawyers who filed these are part of a firm that specializes in elder law and psychiatric commitments. They've been doing this to other potential witnesses. Carlos understood the complete picture now. This isn't just about protecting an insurance fraud scheme. This is about maintaining a systematic program of elimination that requires legal, medical, and law enforcement cooperation at every level. The intercom activated again, this time with a different voice. "This is Lieutenant Marcus Webb, Seattle Police Department. We have the building surrounded. You're wanted for questioning in connection with terrorist threats against healthcare facilities. Come out with your hands visible and no one will be hurt." But through Emma's security cameras, they could see that the actual police response was still blocks away, dealing with traffic and coordination issues that seemed designed to delay their arrival. "Webb," Carlos said grimly, "my former supervisor. If he's here, then this is the official police response. Corrupted from the top down." Emma's live stream viewers had grown to over 200,000, with major news outlets now carrying the feed live. Comments were flooding in from people recognizing patterns in their own cities, federal employees claiming to have seen similar operations, and what appeared to be legitimate law enforcement officers expressing alarm about the situation. "We're getting messages from FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and congressional staffers who say they've been investigating similar networks but haven't been able to build cases because witnesses keep dying or disappearing," Emma reported. Veronica felt pieces clicking into place with devastating clarity. "Emma, we're not just exposing one conspiracy, we're exposing the method they use everywhere. The template that allows systematic elimination of elderly populations in multiple cities simultaneously." Dr. Torres was monitoring medical networks where physicians were now sharing stories of suspicious patient deaths, insurance claim manipulations, and pressure from administrators to avoid certain types of treatments for elderly patients. "It's spreading faster than they can control," she said with growing hope. "Medical professionals nationwide are recognizing the patterns and coming forward." But Carlos was watching the street through Emma's security cameras with growing concern. "We've got new vehicles arriving. Not police, not the people who have been hunting us. Military-style equipment, coordinated movement. This is escalating beyond civilian law enforcement." Emma's expression grew determined as she understood they were approaching the climax of their battle for survival. "Then we better make sure we get everything documented before they try to end this permanently. Because I think we're about to discover whether the truth is really powerful enough to stop people who are willing to kill hundreds of innocent people to protect their profits." Veronica looked at her granddaughter, seeing her own investigative instincts reflected in Emma's eyes. "Emma, whatever happens next, you've already won. The story is out there, people are listening, and the evidence is preserved. That's more than most investigators get when they're fighting this level of corruption. Grandma Vera, we're all going to survive this. Because now we know exactly how big this conspiracy is. And that means we know exactly how many people they've made enemies of by murdering their loved ones." The restraining order was supposed to protect Adeline, but paper barriers meant little to someone who'd already lost everything she thought mattered. Sarah's descent into desperate fury had been swift and absolute. The emergency custody hearing had gone disastrously wrong, with Dr. Walsh's testimony and Detective Santos's evidence painting a picture of manipulation so clear that even Sarah's expensive lawyers couldn't obscure it. The judge had not only denied her petition, but ordered supervised visitation and mandatory counseling, effectively stripping away the control she'd wielded for 15 years. Now, 3 weeks into February, Sarah had nothing left to lose. Adeline was in her kitchen preparing dinner when she heard the car doors slam with unusual force. Through the window, she watched Sarah stride up the walkway with the purposeful gait of someone who'd moved beyond rational thought. Behind her, Emma and Lucas sat in the back seat of the BMW, their faces pressed against the windows with expressions of confusion and growing fear. The pounding on the front door started before Adeline could fully process what was happening. "I know you're in there." Sarah's voice carried the edge of someone who'd been drinking, though it was barely past 5 o'clock. "Open this door right now. I want to see my children with their precious grandmother." Adeline's hands trembled as she reached for her phone, Jake Morrison's number already programmed as her emergency contact. Before she could dial, the pounding intensified, accompanied by Sarah's voice rising to a near shriek. "You destroyed my family! You turned my husband against me, poisoned my children's minds, and now you think you can hide behind legal papers? Open this goddamned door." Through the front window, Adeline could see neighbors beginning to emerge from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Chen, from across the street, stood on her porch with a cordless phone in her hand, clearly debating whether to call police. The Hendersons' teenage son had his cell phone out, possibly recording. The sound of splintering wood made Adeline's blood freeze. Sarah had moved to the back door, and something, a rock, maybe, or a piece of patio furniture, had struck the glass hard enough to spiderweb it without fully breaking through. "Mommy, stop!" Emma's voice carried across the yard, high and terrified. "Please stop." That sound, her granddaughter's fear, cut through Adeline's paralysis like a blade. She speed-dialed Jake's number while moving toward the back of the house, away from Sarah's increasingly violent attempts at entry. "Jake, she's here. Sarah's here, and she's trying to break in. The children are in the car. I'm coming. Stay away from doors and windows. I'm calling 911. Through her bedroom window, Adeline could see Jake Morrison emerge from his house with the fluid efficiency of someone switching into combat mode. He moved across their adjoining yards with purposeful strides, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke to emergency dispatch. Sarah must have seen him coming. Her voice changed, gaining a note of hysteria that made Adeline's skin crawl. "Look what you've done! You've got your boyfriend coming to save you now? This is exactly what I've been trying to protect my family from. This sick, manipulative..." "Ma'am, step away from the house." Jake's voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in crisis situations. "You're trespassing on private property and frightening children. Don't you dare tell me what to do. Those are my children in that car. Then act like a mother and consider what this is doing to them." The silence that followed was more terrifying than Sarah's shouting had been. Through a crack in her bedroom curtains, Adeline could see Sarah standing frozen on her back patio, her designer coat askew, her hair disheveled from her assault on the door. For a moment she looked lost, confused, as if she couldn't quite understand how she'd ended up here. Then her gaze found Jake Morrison, and something ugly and desperate flashed across her features. "You don't understand," she said, her voice dropping to a tone that was somehow more disturbing than her earlier screaming. "She's been poisoning them against me for years, turning my own children into strangers. My own husband." Her voice cracked. "Do you know what it's like to watch your family slip away piece by piece? To see the people you love most start looking at you like you're the enemy?" Jake's response was measured, careful. "I know what it's like to lose everything that matters. But this isn't the way to get it back. What would you know? You're just some broken-down soldier who can't even..." The words died in her throat as sirens became audible in the distance, growing rapidly louder. Sarah's head snapped toward the sound, and Adeline watched understanding dawn on her face. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, committed herself to consequences she hadn't fully considered. "No," Sarah whispered, then louder. "No, no, no, they can't. Emma! Lucas!" She turned toward the car where her children sat, their small faces pale with terror. "Mommy didn't mean... This isn't what..." The first police cruiser rounded the corner as Sarah began running toward her car, her heels clicking against the asphalt with desperate urgency. But Jake Morrison moved with the calculated precision of someone who'd been trained to intercept fleeing suspects, positioning himself between Sarah and the BMW without appearing threatening. "Ma'am, the best thing you can do right now is stay calm and cooperate with the officers," he said. "Think about what your children are seeing." Detective Maria Santos stepped out of the second police car, her professional demeanor intact despite the obvious domestic nature of the call. She took in the scene with trained eyes: the damaged back door, Sarah's disheveled appearance, the children's frightened faces, Jake Morrison's protective stance. "Mrs. Turner," Detective Santos called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd handled hundreds of similar situations. "I need you to step away from the vehicle and place your hands where I can see them." Sarah's composure shattered completely. She spun toward the detective with wild eyes, her voice climbing to a pitch that made the watching neighbors wince. "She did this. That woman in there destroyed my life. She turned my own family against me, made them think I was some kind of monster." Sarah pointed at Adeline's house with a shaking finger. "I gave David 15 years of my life, gave him beautiful children, built him a home, and she couldn't stand that he chose me over her. Ma'am, you're in violation of a restraining order. You need to come with us. Detective Santos's partner, a young officer Adeline didn't recognize, had moved around to the other side of the situation. Standard procedure for containing a potentially volatile subject. Restraining order? Sarah laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You want to know who needs protection? My children! From her. From her manipulation. From the poison she's been spreading about their mother. Through the car windows, Adeline could see Emma trying to comfort Lucas, who was crying now, his small body shaking with sobs. The sight of her grandchildren's terror cut through every other emotion, leaving only a fierce, protective rage. She emerged from her house for the first time since the confrontation began, moving with deliberate calm toward the scene unfolding in her backyard. Sarah, she called out, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Look at what you're doing to them. Look at Emma and Lucas. Sarah whirled toward her, and for a moment Adeline saw something beyond anger in her daughter-in-law's face. Genuine anguish, the kind that comes from watching your own world collapse around you. You don't get to lecture me about my children, Sarah said, but the fire had gone out of her voice, leaving only exhaustion and defeat. You don't get to pretend you care about them when you've been working to take them away from me since the day they were born. I've never wanted to take them away from you, Adeline replied quietly. I only wanted to love them. Liar. The word came out broken, desperate. You wanted to replace me. You wanted David to choose you over his own wife. Wanted my children to love you more than they love their mother. Detective Santos stepped forward, her patience clearly at an end. Mrs. Turner, you have the right to remain silent. The Miranda rights seemed to break whatever tether had been holding Sarah to reality. She sagged against her car like a marionette with cut strings, her expensive coat wrinkled, her perfect hair falling across her face in defeat. Emma, Lucas, she called toward the car, her voice suddenly small and lost. Mommy's sorry. Mommy didn't mean to scare you. But the children weren't looking at their mother anymore. Emma had wrapped her arms around Lucas, turning him away from the scene of his mother being handcuffed, whispering reassurances in the gentle tone she'd learned from her grandmother. As Detective Santos led Sarah toward the patrol car, Adeline found herself moving toward the BMW, where her grandchildren sat trapped in the aftermath of adult decisions. Jake Morrison was already there, speaking quietly to Emma through the partially open window. Your dad's on his way, he was telling her. Everything's going to be okay. Emma looked up at him with eyes far too old for her 12-year-old face. Is Mommy going to jail? Jake's response was honest but gentle. Your mom made some choices that have consequences. But that's not your fault, and it's not your responsibility to fix. When David arrived 20 minutes later, his face was white with shock and something that might have been relief. He gathered his children into his arms with the desperate intensity of someone who'd almost lost everything that mattered. And over their heads, his eyes met his mother's with a clarity that had been absent for years. I'm sorry, he mouthed silently. Not for tonight, but for everything. For 15 years of choosing the wrong side, for enabling abuse, for almost losing his children to the same patterns that had nearly destroyed his mother. As the police cars disappeared into the February dusk, carrying Sarah toward consequences she'd brought upon herself, Adeline stood in her backyard surrounded by the people who'd become her chosen family. Jake Morrison checked the damaged door with professional efficiency. Helen Morrison arrived with hot chocolate and the kind of practical comfort that came from decades of dealing with military crises. Pastor Kim materialized with quiet prayers and gentle wisdom. But most importantly, Emma and Lucas clung to their grandmother with the desperate relief of children who'd been caught in an adult storm and finally found shelter. The final battle was over. Sarah Turner's war against love and family connection had ended not with victory or defeat, but with the simple recognition that some fights aren't worth winning, and some prices are too high to pay. In the growing darkness of a February evening, as neighbors returned to their houses and normal life slowly resumed, Adeline held her grandchildren and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, peace. The kind of peace that comes when truth finally prevails over manipulation, when love proves stronger than control, and when a family that was nearly destroyed finds a way to heal. 6 months later, the August sun slanted through the kitchen windows of Adeline's house as she watched Emma carefully measure flour into a mixing bowl. Lucas stood on his step stool beside her, his tongue poking out in concentration as he cracked eggs with the deliberate precision of an 8-year-old who'd been trusted with an important task. "Remember what Grandma taught us?" Emma said to her little brother, her voice carrying the patient authority of someone who'd grown up too fast but was finally allowed to be a child again. "Tap it 3 times, then crack it on the edge." The kitchen counter was dusted with flour, sticky with vanilla extract, and marked by the cheerful chaos that comes when children are allowed to truly help rather than simply observe. Adeline moved between her grandchildren, with the easy rhythm of someone who'd rediscovered her purpose, offering guidance when needed, but mostly just enjoying the sound of their laughter, mixing with the whir of the stand mixer. David appeared in the doorway, his sleeves rolled up, and his hair messed from the afternoon they'd spent in the backyard building a treehouse with Jake Morrison. The past months had transformed him, not just physically, though he'd lost the pinched, anxious look that had marked his features for years, but fundamentally. He moved with the confidence of a man who'd chosen his priorities and found peace in the choosing. "How are the cookies coming along?" he asked, sneaking a piece of dough from the bowl before Emma could swat his hand away. "Dad, that's gross! There are raw eggs in there!" But she was laughing as she said it, the kind of uninhibited giggle that had been absent from her voice for too long. Through the window, Adeline could see Jake Morrison cleaning his tools with the methodical precision that marked everything he did. The treehouse was nearly finished, a proper architectural marvel that David had designed and Jake had brought to life with his craftsman's skills. Emma had requested windows on 3 sides, so she could read in the morning light. Lucas had insisted on a rope ladder, because regular stairs were, quote, too boring. It was exactly the kind of project Sarah would have vetoed, as too messy, too dangerous, too likely to encourage the children to spend time outdoors, where she couldn't monitor their every interaction. But Sarah was gone, serving 18 months in minimum security for stalking and violation of a restraining order. The divorce had been finalized in May, with David receiving full custody, and Sarah granted supervised visitation rights she'd yet to exercise. Her parents had hired expensive lawyers, but even they couldn't argue with video evidence of her breakdown, witness testimony from neighbors, and Detective Santos's thoroughly documented report. The children spoke of their mother rarely, and when they did, it was with the careful neutrality of kids who'd learned that adult relationships were complicated things best left to adults. Dr. Walsh continued to see them both weekly, helping them process trauma and rebuild their sense of security. "Emma's been asking about Christmas," David said, settling onto one of the kitchen stools. "She wants to know if we can have it here again this year." Adeline paused in her stirring, remembering last Christmas. The careful preparations, the walking on eggshells, the disaster that had somehow led to this moment of ordinary domestic happiness. "What did you tell her?" "That it's up to you. It's your house, your tradition to share or not." The answer revealed how much David had changed. The old David would have made assumptions, would have told Emma yes without consulting Adeline, would have tried to manage everyone's expectations to avoid conflict. This David asked permission, respected boundaries, understood that love didn't entitle him to anything beyond what was freely given. "Of course we'll have Christmas here," Adeline said. "But this year, we're making some changes." Emma looked up from measuring brown sugar, her face bright with curiosity. "What kind of changes?" "Well, for one thing, you two are going to help plan the menu. And cook it. And if we want to have cookies for breakfast, or eat dessert first, we will." Lucas's eyes went wide with the kind of wonder that comes when adults announce that rules aren't as fixed as they'd always seemed. "Really? Cookies for breakfast? On Christmas morning, why not?" David shook his head with mock horror. "My children are going to be spoiled rotten." "That's what grandmothers are for," Adeline replied, but her tone was gentle, without the defensive edge that had marked similar conversations in the past. Sarah's constant criticism had made her doubt her instincts, question whether her love was too much, too indulgent, too threatening to proper parental authority. Dr. Walsh had helped her understand that Sarah's complaints hadn't been about the children's well-being. They'd been about control, about maintaining the narrative that Adeline was a disruptive force rather than a loving presence. The timer chimed, and Emma carefully removed the first batch of cookies from the oven, with the kind of focus that suggested this task had taken on ceremonial importance. These weren't just cookies. They were proof that normal family moments were possible again, that kitchens could be places of creation rather than criticism. "Jake's coming to dinner tonight," David said casually, but Adeline caught the careful neutrality in his voice. Her relationship with Jake Morrison had developed slowly, built on shared understanding rather than desperate need. They were both people who'd survived their own kinds of warfare, his literal, hers psychological, and found comfort in each other's quiet strength. "Is that okay with you?" she asked. Though she knew the answer, David and Jake had formed their own friendship during the months of legal proceedings, bonding over their shared protectiveness toward Emma and Lucas. "More than okay. Jake's good for you, Mom. Good for all of us." The simple acceptance in his voice would have been impossible 8 months ago, when Sarah's influence had made him suspicious of any relationship that didn't serve her narrative of proper family hierarchy. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Jake appeared at the back door, knocking despite Adeline's repeated insistence that he should just come in. Some habits from his solitary years died hard. "Smells like trouble in here," he said, accepting the coffee cup Adeline handed him, and surveying the flour-dusted chaos with approval rather than alarm. "We're making your favorite," Lucas announced proudly. "Chocolate chip cookies with extra chips, because Grandma says you have a sweet tooth." "Your grandmother knows me too well," Jake replied solemnly, then caught Adeline's eye with the kind of look that made her feel like a teenager despite her 67 years. Helen Morrison arrived just as they were pulling the last batch from the oven, carrying a casserole dish, and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who'd successfully meddled in her son's love life. "I brought shepherd's pie," she announced, "and before anyone objects, I made enough for an army because I know how these children eat." It was exactly the kind of assumption that would have triggered a Sarah lecture about appropriate portions and teaching children restraint. But Emma and Lucas simply hugged their honorary grandmother and asked if she'd brought the special potatoes they liked. As evening settled over the neighborhood, they gathered around the same table where Christmas dinner had exploded 8 months ago. But this time, there were no hidden tensions, no careful navigation of invisible minefields. Lucas told knock-knock jokes between bites of shepherd's pie. Emma discussed her upcoming school play with the confidence of someone who knew her audience would be enthusiastically present. David and Jake debated the finer points of treehouse engineering, while Helen and Adeline planned the flower garden they wanted to plant in the spring. It was ordinary. Beautifully, perfectly ordinary. After the children were in bed, David lingered on the front porch while Jake helped Adeline clean up the dinner dishes. The August air was soft with the promise of autumn, and fireflies were beginning to dance in the growing shadows. "Mom," David said when she joined him on the porch swing Harold had built 30 years ago, "I need to say something." She settled beside him, noting how much more relaxed he'd become in recent months. The perpetual tension that had marked his shoulders for years had finally eased. "I failed you," he said quietly. "For 15 years, I failed to protect you from someone who was systematically trying to destroy your relationship with your family. I chose the easy path over the right path, and I let you pay the price for my cowardice." "David, please, let me finish." His voice carried the weight of months of therapy and self-reflection. "I know I can't undo those years. I can't give you back the time you lost with Emma and Lucas, or erase the hurt Sarah caused. But I can promise you that it will never happen again. Your place in this family isn't conditional on anyone's approval but mine and the children's. And we choose you. We will always choose you." Through the screen door, she could hear Jake loading the dishwasher with his characteristic efficiency, humming something that might have been an old country song. In the backyard, the half-finished treehouse stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, a testament to the kind of collaborative love that builds rather than tears down. We all made mistakes, Adeline said finally. What matters is what we do going forward. And as the first stars appeared in the summer sky, she realized that going forward looked brighter than it had in years. Not perfect. Healing was a process, not a destination, but filled with the kind of hope that comes when people choose love over fear, truth over convenience, and each other over the alternatives. The Christmas that had nearly destroyed them had, in the end, saved them all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,